She stood by the door, feeling the storm inside her. Cold, mocking eyes stared back, and the words, "You're not on the list," hit like a blow. But when he walked in, everything changed. What happened next will shake even the toughest souls. But let's start from the beginning.
It was a brisk morning in downtown Manhattan, the air crisp with the scent of fresh coffee and city grime. The towering glass giants of corporate New York stood like silent sentinels, casting long, sharp shadows across the bustling streets below. Maya Johnson, a black woman in her mid-30s, stepped onto the polished marble floors of the law firm's lobby. Her navy blue suit, impeccably tailored, gave off an air of authority. The red scarf wrapped around her neck was a subtle nod to her confidence, a splash of color in the sea of sterile professionalism. Her hair, pulled back into a neat updo, framed her face with precision. She approached the reception desk, the clack of her heels echoing through the vast, sterile space. Kelly, the receptionist, looked up briefly. In her mid-40s, Kelly was a white woman with sharp features and a look that suggested she'd seen it all and judged it all. Her gaze fell on Maya for a beat too long before flicking down to the watch on her wrist. Her eyes narrowed, and a slight sneer curled on her lips. "Can I help you?" Kelly's voice was sharp, devoid of warmth. Maya, her confidence unwavering, replied, "I have a 10 a.m. interview with Mr. Thompson." She reached into her bag, pulling out her confirmation email. Kelly glanced at the screen in front of her, then glanced away, her disinterest palpable. "You're not on the list," she said, her voice flat. She returned to her papers without so much as a second thought. Maya felt a sting in her chest, a fleeting pang of disbelief. She steadied herself before speaking again. "I'm sure there's been some mistake. Could you please check again?" Kelly didn't even lift her gaze. "I said, you're not on the list, and I don't let just anyone in here." The words hit like a slap, but Maya didn't flinch. Her face remained calm, controlled. Her pulse, however, was quickening, a dull ache spreading beneath her ribs. The sharp taste of frustration sat in her throat, but she held herself steady. She wasn't going to make a scene, not yet. Maya stepped aside, her mind racing as she fought a quiet battle with herself. Every instinct told her to speak up, to demand answers, to call someone, anyone, who could intervene. But a deeper voice held her back. No, she couldn't risk it. She couldn't afford to be seen as trouble, not now, not after everything she'd worked for. Years of late nights, networking, sacrifices, and countless doubts. One moment of confrontation could derail everything she had fought so hard to achieve. Kelly remained engrossed in her task, her fingers moving over the keyboard with mechanical precision. Maya could feel the silence stretching between them, thickening in the air like a fog. She wanted to say something, but her words felt trapped somewhere deep inside. Instead, she noticed the subtle glances of judgment from the passing employees, furtive, almost imperceptible. They whispered just loud enough for her to hear, their eyes darting in her direction, then quickly away. The feeling of being the subject of quiet judgment prickled at her skin. 10 minutes dragged by, the tick of the clock on the wall painfully slow. Maya glanced at the polished marble floors, the sterile white walls, the sleek modern furnishings that seemed to mock her discomfort. Her thoughts spiraled, but she quickly pushed them aside. She couldn't let this situation get to her. She had to stay composed. Then, the sound of high heels clicking sharply against the marble broke through the silence, like a crack of thunder. Maya looked up. Mr. Thompson, the senior partner she was supposed to meet, stepped into the doorway. He was tall, imposing in a way that instantly commanded attention. His gaze met hers, and in that brief moment, everything else in the room faded away. It was only when his eyes shifted to Kelly that the tension broke, and Maya saw the shift in his demeanor, sharp, assessing. Maya Johnson? His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. Maya stood up straighter, a small surge of dignity rushing through her despite the awkwardness of the moment. She nodded, trying to hold her ground. "Why wasn't she let in?" Mr. Thompson asked, his tone clipped, his focus unyielding as it remained locked on Maya. Kelly froze, a flush creeping across her face as she sputtered out an explanation. She wasn't on the list," she muttered, but there was no conviction in her voice. Maya watched as Mr. Thompson's face shifted, his features hardening, and for the first time since entering the building, she felt a faint sense of justice stirring within her. His words were sharp, decisive, and carried an unmistakable authority. "I don't care what list she's on. If you can't treat every candidate with respect, you're not fit to be working here." The sting of his reprimand landed on Kelly like a slap. Her posture stiffened, and a deep flush of embarrassment spread across her cheeks. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out, her usual superiority slipping away under the weight of Mr. Thompson's glare. Maya, still standing by the door, felt a flicker of hope rise in her chest. The invisible weight that had settled on her during those long, tense minutes seemed to lift, though just slightly. She had been overlooked, dismissed with cold disregard. She had been rejected not for her qualifications or experience, but for something beyond her control, something she had never been able to change: the color of her skin. But in that moment, as Mr. Thompson spoke, she felt the tiniest shift, a promise of fairness, of being seen for who she truly was. For the first time that morning, Maya felt like she wasn't invisible. She wasn't just another candidate to be ignored or overlooked. She was here. She was visible. "I'm terribly sorry, Ms. Johnson," Mr. Thompson continued, his voice now softened with genuine regret, the harshness of his previous words replaced by something more compassionate. His eyes locked onto hers, and there was a sincerity in his gaze that made her feel, just for a moment, like her worth had been recognized. "Please, follow me to my office. I'll make sure this never happens again." Maya's heart beat a little faster, the weight of her frustration easing as she nodded. The sting of Kelly's dismissive attitude still lingered, but it was slowly being replaced by a quiet strength. This wasn't over. Far from it. But in this moment, Maya was no longer the person left waiting in the cold. She was taking control. Maya entered the office, her posture straighter, her steps more confident. Mr. Thompson's apology didn't erase the sting of the past 10 minutes, but it meant something. She had won, not just in this moment, but in a deeper way. As they sat down for the interview, Maya couldn't help but notice how Kelly now seemed to avoid eye contact, her face flushed with shame. It was clear the secretary was fully aware of her mistake, and the power dynamics had shifted. It was no longer Maya who felt small and invisible. By the end of the interview, Maya was offered the job. As she stood up to leave, she locked eyes with Kelly. This time, the secretary's expression had changed. Her face was no longer one of arrogance or dismissal. It was a face that held regret and a newfound understanding of the consequences of her actions. Maya walked out of the building, the weight of the last few minutes slowly lifting from her shoulders. She had faced injustice, but in the end she had been validated. She hadn't just been given a job. She had claimed her space, and nothing, not even a small moment of disrespect, would ever take that away from her again.